Rob glanced at the clock. It was already 3 in the morning, and he couldn't fall asleep. The reason was that the next morning he was getting married. It would be his second marriage. The first time he got married was when he was 23. He and Lucia were young and foolish. The girl got pregnant, so they had to get married. Rob was a real man, after all. They had their own little shop of tables and chairs that Rob created himself in the garage with his friends. The news of the pregnancy seemed to give him extra motivation. He put much more effort into his business. Lucia worked as a school secretary until she went on maternity leave. She never returned from it. Rob's business quickly became successful. He was lucky. He found a good client who was opening a chain of restaurants and ordered furniture in bulk. Rob reinvested the money he earned into his business. Lucia hinted that it would be nice to start thinking about buying clothes and a stroller for the baby's arrival. She didn't demand everything at once. She just believed in the success of his business. And she was right. In just 1 year, his income increased so much that his bank card had a 6-digit figure, and every month he earned more and more. Eventually, it led to Rob becoming the owner of the largest network of furniture factories. Despite Lucia and Rob's wedding happening quite unexpectedly, they were truly happy with each other. They named their son Kevin. The boy never knew what poverty was. By the time he reached a conscious age, his dad was already among the list of the richest and most successful young entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, they weren't destined to grow old together. No wealth could defy fate. Lucia fell out of a pleasure boat during a trip with her friends, hit her head on the side, and immediately sank. Rescuers couldn't do anything. All this happened in front of 8-year-old Kevin. On that day, Rob was in important negotiations. He turned off his phone so that nothing and no one would distract him from his business. How happy he was coming out of the negotiation room, as he had just signed a contract for a huge amount. Only 5 minutes passed between him leaving quite pleased with himself and him falling to his knees right in the middle of the business center upon hearing the terrible news about his wife. It's been 7 years since that tragedy, but neither Rob nor Kevin ever rode on boats or even stayed close to water. 2 years ago, he met Drew. The girl was 14 years younger than Rob, but age difference was no obstacle for true love. Moreover, Rob looked great for his age. Kevin hated his father's girlfriend from the very beginning, and his feelings were mutual. Drew also thought the boy was too spoiled. Rob immediately told the girl not to interfere in his relationship with his son. He set those boundaries from the very beginning but promised to talk to Kevin about not hurting Drew. Around Rob, they tried to communicate as calmly and indifferently as possible. But when he wasn't home, they didn't hold back on insults. Kevin dreamed that his father would one day come to his senses and realize that Drew was just a gold digger, that she felt no love for him. But all the boy's hopes were shattered when his father proposed to the girl. "That's your stupidest mistake in life," he told his father. Then he forced a smile at Drew and said in a disgusted voice, "Congratulations. You got what you wanted." The boy got up and demonstratively left for his room. "He's just going through a phase." Rob waved it off. "Don't pay attention. He'll go study abroad and won't bother us." I've long stopped being hurt by his insults. I've got used to them over the past 2 years, replied the happy Drew. "I'm so happy. I love you." Rob remained completely calm throughout all the wedding preparations. He didn't suffer at all from choosing the restaurant, coordinating the menu, inviting guests, and other pre-wedding bustle. But it was precisely on the night before the celebration that a thought crossed his mind. Am I making a mistake? He understood it was just nerves. However, when he married Lucia, he had no doubts about the correctness of his actions. Perhaps he was a bit bothered by the age difference. Or maybe it bothered him that Drew was much more demanding and assertive than Lucia. Rob closed his eyes. "Stop comparing Lucia and Drew. They're completely different," Rob said aloud, and turned onto his other side. "That's absolutely true," unexpectedly replied Kevin, who also couldn't sleep. He was passing by his father's bedroom and overheard his phrase, "Why are you lurking around the door?" The father said, "Since you are not sleeping, let's have a man-to-man talk." The son, unabashed, pushed the already slightly open door and entered the room. Rob sat on the bed, and Kevin sat down next to him. "Why does she want to stay at the hotel?" Kevin asked his father. "She says that the bride and groom should spend the last night before the wedding separately. She has a photo shoot scheduled there," Rob replied. To be honest, he also didn't understand why they couldn't just go to the hotel in the morning. Anyway, the makeup artist, photographer, and other essential people were supposed to arrive only by 10 in the morning. However, he didn't want to argue with his beautiful bride. It was her first wedding after all. "Do you ever think about Mom?" Kevin asked again. "Not a day goes by without me thinking about her," Rob answered seriously. "Don't think that if I marry another woman, I've forgotten about Lucia. No, she's always in my heart, and no one will take her place. But we have to move forward. We can't live in the past. You'll understand when you grow up. I'm already grown up, and I understand everything except one thing." "Why, Drew?" The young man spoke calmly, without anger or resentment. "You, like all rich men, decided to marry a beautiful woman just because she has no wrinkles and plump lips." "Son, it's love," Rob replied. "I wouldn't marry someone I don't trust. As for a home decoration, I have you." Rob chuckled and nudged the boy in the side. Kevin moved away from him with a hint of offense, but he wasn't angry. He was already accustomed to his father's jokes. In general, their sense of humor was what cemented their family bonds. They often teased each other in a friendly manner. This helped them get through any conflict. In this household, the only person you couldn't joke about was Drew. "But if you're not sleeping right now, if you're pondering, it means you are doubting your choice." The boy returned to the topic. "Doubts always haunt us, son. Even in simple things," his father replied. He adopted a deliberately philosophical tone, feeling like he was imparting years of wisdom to Kevin. "You think every day whether to have coffee or tea for breakfast. And I always know I'll have tea," Kevin replied and got up from the bed. "And I never regret my choice or compare it to coffee. I know for sure that coffee gives me palpitations. It makes me feel bad. I only had to try it once. But you, every time you know coffee is bad for you, but you keep drinking it by the cup." The boy left the room, leaving his father alone with his thoughts. It seemed this time his son was wiser. Kevin hinted that Rob had once lived with a young girl. She was just over 22. He broke up with her 6 months before meeting Drew. He and Amy were together for only 4 months, and they split up because Rob caught his lover near the safe. Somehow, she found out the password and wanted to take out the money and valuables that remained from Lucia. Rob couldn't get rid of them. He kept them as a memory, but Rob was sure that this time would be different. He knew for sure that Drew wouldn't betray or deceive him. After all, they had been together for 2 years, and the girl had never given him reason to doubt the sincerity of her feelings. Rob waved his hand and lay back on the pillow. It's useless to talk to a teenager, he decided, and closed his eyes. Strangely enough, he fell asleep instantly. Perhaps he just needed to talk to someone, and he immediately felt better. Everyone has their own problems. Some worry about getting married, while others lose sleep at night because they don't know what they'll eat tomorrow. Besides the wealthy, there are people in the world living entirely different lives. It's not even the middle class. It's much lower. Representing such society was Jackie. She had just turned 20. Her mother died from exposure some time ago. The woman drank, was on the police register, and authorities had tried to take away her daughters multiple times. On the last day of her life, she drank so much that she couldn't enter the house and fell asleep on the street. Jackie found her in the morning. The girl was deeply frightened and screamed, waking up her younger sister. Yes, Jackie wasn't the only child in the family. She had a 14-year-old sister, Gabby. With great difficulty, The girl managed to get guardianship of herself, and Gabby didn't end up in an orphanage. They lived in a hostel. The girl's neighbors were alcoholics like their mother. The sisters were afraid to go out on the street unnecessarily. Money was tight for them. What helped was that Jackie received benefits for guardianship, but she also worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Every time Jackie received her salary and benefits, she sat down at the table with a notebook and pen to budget the money. This month there's very little money left. I told you not to take sick leave, Jackie lamented, looking at her sister sitting across from her. You had a fever. How could you work in that condition? Gabby exclaimed, shaking her head. And if complications arose, you wouldn't have been able to work even longer. The girl calculated how much they needed to save for food to cover utility bills. It's our chief doctor's birthday this month. They'll make us buy another gift, Jackie whispered, chewing on her pen. Gabby wanted to say something but hesitated. Perhaps she was afraid to distract her sister from her calculations, or maybe her suggestion was too bold. Why can't you sit still? Go to bed. You're just distracting, Jackie said. Jackie, I want to work too, Gabby said softly. She spoke almost in a whisper because voicing her desire was terrifying. She knew that Jackie would start talking about school again, that she needed to think about her studies. Gabby had long expressed to her sister the idea that after getting her passport, she wanted to find a part-time job. I'm glad you also want to contribute to our budget, but you know perfectly well that it's impossible, Jackie replied. You need to study. I won't allow you to drop out of school for work. And if you want, you can hand out flyers on weekends. Well, I've already done that. Didn't you notice that there's milk in the fridge now and bread in the drawer? The girl spoke more boldly. But the thing is, my entire day's wages only cover that. Well, I also bought myself a chocolate bar. Jackie shook her head disapprovingly. She guiltily lowered her eyes to the floor, and her cheeks turned red. The girl was ashamed that her younger sister had to work, and to think about not having enough money. Jackie herself had lived in poverty all her life, but she had also experienced good times. While her father was alive, everything was fine, and her mother didn't drink alcohol. But after his death, the woman seemed to lose her mind. She sold the apartment and moved to this hostel. After their father's funeral, Jackie never saw her mother sober again. Gabby was just a baby then. Poor thing. She didn't understand anything, and little Jackie became both her mother and father. What Jackie feared most in life was that Gabby would repeat her fate. When Jackie turned 18, she promised that she would save up money, rent them an apartment. Jackie dreamed of taking her sister and moving away from their mother. Of course, she couldn't save up for housing, but she managed to save money for a few months' rent for some modest apartment. But the move never happened. Their mother found that money and spent it on alcohol. That's when Gabby saw her sister in despair for the first time. She even wanted to attack her own mother with her fists. It was at that moment that Gabby, who had just turned 12, realized that she would always defend her sister. Each of them knew that a sister was the only support and solace in this life. Only Jackie felt more responsible. After all, she was the older. And now Gabby was already trying to work, and she was only 14. Would they ever be able to live well and peacefully? Jackie didn't have an answer to that question. Hope was fading away. I heard the neighbors saying that Simona died. She worked as a cleaner for you. They're probably looking for a replacement for her now, Gabby continued, her voice becoming bolder with each word. Do you know that Simona cleaned at the crematorium? She worked at night, Jackie replied. Well, that's very convenient. I'll be at school during the day, and at night, I can earn some extra money. Gabby rejoiced. After school, I'll have time to rest until the evening. Gabby, Jackie said seriously, it's a crematorium. They burn bodies there. Do you even realize what it's like? What kind of atmosphere is there? There are corpses lying there. I'm not afraid of the dead. Gabby waved her hand. You were more scared of our mom than I am. Jackie admitted that her younger sister was indeed much stronger emotionally than she was, but she still refused her request. Gabby persisted for another week. Finally, Jackie gave in. I'm not promising anything. I'll just talk to our head doctor. If he agrees, then go ahead and walk. But no one will hire an underage child. Jackie resisted her sister's persuasions. The girl didn't lie. She did talk to the hospital's chief physician. To her surprise, he agreed. The man explained that no one wanted to take such an unpleasant and low-paying job. If Gabby only wanted to work at night, that was even better. No one would see her. He wouldn't receive any complaints or fines for child labor either. Though with difficulty, Jackie helped her sister get a job at the crematorium. She asked her several times if she was sure about her decision, reminding her that it was not too late to back out. The last time she asked, she was already holding onto the door handle, which probably led to the scariest place in the hospital. Open it. The sooner I start, the sooner I finish. Gabby couldn't hold back. Her eyes were sad, yet determined. While her classmates were going to school dances, having their first kisses, she was forced to mop floors in such a dreadful place. As soon as Jackie opened the door, she instantly caught a foul smell. Gabby wrinkled her nose and covered it. Do you still want to work here? Jackie asked. Yeah, it was just a little unexpected. And anyway, it doesn't smell like anything anymore, Gabby replied, removing her hand from her face. In reality, the smell quickly dissipated, or Gabby got used to it, but it certainly didn't bother her. There were several bodies lying on stretchers, ready to be cremated in the morning. Gabby looked around, carefully avoiding looking at those stretchers. Jackie returned with a bucket and mop, waved her hand to her sister, and said she would show her where to get water. Gabby worked only at night, every other day. Jackie tried to align her shifts to work together with her sister, but of course, it didn't work out. Gabby asked her to stop watching over her, promising that everything would be fine. Of course, she just didn't want her sister to worry. She was scared and sad about her situation, but she had nowhere else to go. Gabby was strong-willed. She never complained to her sister, even though spending nights in the crematorium was incredibly frightening. When Jackie was on duty in the same shift as her sister, she always sat with Gabby. But when the girl was left alone, it was a nightmare. She constantly heard frightening sounds, saw shadows. If there was a deceased person in the hall during her shift, Gabby always felt like they were about to get up and grab her by the neck. She sat in the corner and cried. And it was like that every time. Look. Jackie handed her phone with photos of a girl in a wedding dress. This is my acquaintance. While our dad was still alive, she lived in the neighboring building. Looks like she's doing well. She married a wealthy entrepreneur. Maybe you shouldn't have ignored how during school years. You could have been the bride's friend now. Would have found yourself a rich groom there, Gabby suggested. Sure, Jackie laughed. Nobody wanted to stand near me in school. You know how we lived and still live. Drew always had short skirts, fashionable tops, makeup. I still can't afford any of that. You're way prettier than her. Gabby supported her sister. Look, she's 3 years older than you, but looks like there's a 10-year difference. Do you think she really loves this man? But she lives in a mansion, not a dorm, Jackie said sadly, turning off her phone. Drew even ordered coverage of her wedding from some publications. She wanted everyone in town to know what kind of man she managed to snag, so that anyone who had ever seen her would look at the news and say, wow, she managed to achieve success. Some, like Jackie, simply turned off their phones discontentedly and put them away. Others began to write messages, reminding of their existence and asking for a meeting. Naive. Drew laughed as she deleted unread messages. They think that just because I'm now a millionaire's wife, they can ask me for money loans. I don't understand why you had to turn our wedding into such a show. Rob grumbled, displeased. It's our celebration. It's about us. and you turned it into a public event. When we married Lucia, we didn't even invite guests. We just had tea in a cafe and went home." Drew aggressively looked at her husband. She really disliked it when Rob compared her to his late wife. Lucia always won in that comparison, not demanding so much money, being involved in charity work, helping animals, and even sick children. Rob saw his wife's reaction and immediately apologized. "He's become spineless," Kevin whispered quietly, who was standing near his father and stepmother at that moment. The boy could hear their conversation perfectly. 2 days later, Rob and Drew were getting ready for their honeymoon. It was just for a week, as Kevin was staying home alone. Firstly, he didn't want to go on his father's romantic trip himself. Watching him cuddle with Drew for 7 days straight wasn't the most pleasant prospect. Secondly, he had to study. The end of the school year was approaching. Drew was packing her things and chatting on the phone with her friend. Kevin walked past the dressing room where his young stepmother was and heard his mother's name. He immediately stopped to eavesdrop on the conversation. He would never have done so if Drew had been talking about someone else, but she was insulting his mother. She complained to her friend that Rob constantly remembers her, compares them. "If I could, I would resurrect her and kill her again," Drew said, laughing loudly. Kevin couldn't forgive his stepmother for that statement. He burst into the dressing room and froze. When he just heard the last sentence, he wanted to hit Drew, but realized he couldn't hit a girl. Drew got scared and screamed. Security immediately rushed to them. Kevin clenched his fists and glared angrily at his stepmother. Drew realized he had heard everything and was barely holding himself back from hitting her. Drew noticed that security was already running towards them. "Let go. Help," she screamed. Kevin got scared. He hadn't even touched her. The boy wanted to calm Drew down, stretched out his hands in front of him, and asked her to stop screaming. From behind, it wasn't clear what he was doing. Suddenly, Drew slammed her face into the shelf with all her might, and blood started pouring from her nose. "You've completely lost it," Kevin shouted. The security guards were already standing by the entrance to the dressing room. When they saw they had to protect Drew from their employer's son, they froze and didn't know what to do. "I didn't touch her. She hit herself in the nose." Kevin tried to justify himself to the security guards. "He hit me," Drew cried out plaintively and somewhat hysterically. Now Rob heard some noise downstairs. He quickly descended from his office and saw 2 of his security guards standing in confusion. Kevin looked at them fearfully and tried to explain something, while Drew, her face and dress already covered in blood, sat on the floor screaming loudly that she had been beaten. Rob immediately rushed to his young wife, completely ignoring what his son was saying. "He broke my nose," Drew cried. "Dad, she's lying. This idiot hid herself on the closet. She said horrible things about my mom. I just wanted to talk to her, and she broke her own nose." Kevin justified himself. "I don't want to listen to you," Rob replied sternly. He sharply turned his head towards his son. Rob's look indicated that Kevin was senselessly babbling. The father believed his beloved woman, not him. "He's ready to do anything just to ruin our vacation," Drew cried. "How can I travel with such a nose?" "Don't worry. It's just a bruise," Rob reassured Drew. "We'll go to the hospital right away. The doctor will examine you. If necessary, we can postpone our honeymoon. We can fly to resorts every week. Just don't cry." The flight had to be postponed for a week. Drew refused to fly. She didn't have a fracture, but she had black bruises under her eyes, which gave her a funny resemblance to a panda. Kevin didn't miss the opportunity to tease her, as they both knew she had provoked such a result herself. Of course, he did it when his father wasn't around. In his presence, the boy didn't even approach Drew. Rob and Drew flew away for their vacation. Kevin was left alone for the first time for a whole week. Although it's hard to call it loneliness to live in a house where a dozen people from the staff live. During the day, he had a tutor coming to him. Then Kevin was taken to football practice. He returned home only in the evening. For half an hour, he played video games on the TV and went to bed. As a result, the boy could only relax properly on Sunday. It was always a day free from all activities. On Monday, around noon, his father and Drew were supposed to return. Kevin wanted to spend this day somehow unusually. He was tired of being at home, but he couldn't go anywhere except the backyard. To make sure the boy wasn't afraid to be alone, a security guard spent time with him. Kevin called him Terry and loved him very much. This man was like a close uncle or some very close relative to him. It was Terry who looked after the boy all the time when Rob was away, even replacing a nanny when he was very young. Terry, let's go to the city and take a walk there. At least just stroll through the park, Kevin suggested. Look at this beautiful weather. It's the end of October, yet it's warm and sunny. Soon everything will be covered in snow, and it'll be slushy and cold. It's a whole year to wait for the right time for a walk. Kevin, you know your father will kill me if he finds out. Terry replied. He's just pretending to be angry. Kevin waved his hand. He won't do anything because he won't find out. Terry slapped his knees and waved his hand. Let's do it, he said eagerly. Terry and Kevin got into the car. The boy even insisted on sitting in the front seat because he wanted to see the city. He usually traveled the same routes and didn't know any areas except those he frequented. Take us somewhere quiet and peaceful. Without any fuss, Kevin requested, let's go to the neighborhood where I lived as a child. I remember there was a beautiful alley there, Terry suggested. Kevin nodded approvingly and fastened his seatbelt. The road took them about 20 minutes. The boy noticed that the farther they drove from where he lived, the sadder the view outside the window became. There weren't as many beautiful houses and trees. People looked tired and unhappy. Mansions were replaced by old apartment buildings, and you lived here. What a nightmare, Kevin exclaimed. I don't live in as beautiful a place as you do now, Terry said with a hint of sadness in his voice. Yes, I bought a bigger apartment, but I still can't reach the luxury your father has. People he don't fly to resorts abroad. They don't have phones like yours, but they're happy, in their own way. Maybe even more than I am, Kevin replied, his mood also changing. Look, there's a family working with a little one. He has both a mom and a dad. Nobody worked with me except you. Terry parked the car near the alley. Kevin and his guard got out of the car and went for a walk among the trees. Young mothers passed by with strollers. Kids rode bikes and scooters. No one was in a hurry. No one was dealing with urgent matters on the phone. And fathers played with their sons or taught them to rollerblade. Kevin felt very sad. He could hardly count the days when his father was free and spent time with him. Terry and Kevin approached the ice cream stand. The boy immediately said he wanted to try it. There was a long line. Surely, this treat was very tasty. Ahead of them in line were two girls. One was about 20 years old, and the other was younger. The younger one was counting money. Gabby, maybe we'll skip the ice cream today, Jackie said. I just remembered we haven't paid the electricity bill yet. Ice cream is very cheap, Gabby replied, offended. Listen to what I'm telling you, the older sister protested. Well, let's just get one to share, Gabby suggested. Cupping her hands together, Jackie shook her head and left the line. Let's go. No sweets today. Let's watch our figure, Jackie called out to her. Watch our figure, Gabby mocked her sister. I'll tear my dress with my bones soon. Why should I save it? Jackie sat on the bench and lowered her head. Gabby noticed tears rolling down her sister's eyes. The girl sat down next to her and rested her head on her shoulder. Stop crying over such nonsense, Gabby comforted Jackie. We'll buy some next time. Terry and Kevin witnessed this conversation. The boy looked bewildered at the guard. His gaze seemed to ask, do people live so badly? He didn't ask anything, but Terry understood him. He pursed his lips and nodded. When it was Kevin's turn in line, he asked for 2 regular ice creams and 2 of the biggest and most expensive ones. He kept the simpler ones for himself and his companion, and carried the 2 others to the bench where the 2 sad girls were sitting. Gabby stared at the asphalt and kicked a pebble with her feet. Finally, she and her sister had a day off together. They wanted to distract themselves and take a walk in the alley. But even here they faced disappointment and another reminder that they had nothing. Not even enough money for 2 portions of ice cream. Suddenly, an ice cream appeared in front of Gabby. She looked up and saw a cute boy offering her the treat. "Enjoy," he said kindly. Gabby nudged Jackie in the side. She looked up, startled, at Kevin, who was also offering her a treat. "Thank you," the girls said in unison. Equally flustered, they took the ice cream and watched as the man and the boy worked further down the alley. As Kevin left, he winked at Gabby. To himself, he noted that she was very pretty, just dressed somewhat strangely and very slender. "That's the millionaire's son, the one Drew married," Jackie recalled. "Seems like he took a liking to you. Maybe you're our future businessman's wife." "You wish," Gabby replied to her sister. The girls laughed. Kevin had mixed feelings about this work. On one hand, he was happy and intrigued by glimpsing another life. On the other hand, he felt very sad knowing that there were people who were so unhappy. It had been 6 months since Rob and Drew got married. Kevin still couldn't get used to his stepmother, but they didn't cause trouble for each other anymore. They simply tried to stay away from each other. One day, Kevin's football practice was cancelled. His coach fell ill, and there was no replacement. The young man was heading home in a cheerful mood. He knew he could be alone because his father was working late. He had warned everyone in the morning that he would come home late, and Drew was planning to meet with her friends, which meant the meeting could drag on until late at night. Kevin opened the door, walked into the house, and tossed his backpack right on the floor. The servants would clean up everything. He didn't feel like doing anything today. The lad went upstairs, passing by his father's and Drew's bedroom. The door to the room was ajar, so he could hear some very distinctive sounds. He was already at that age when he could guess what was happening behind the door. "Ack." Kevin whispered and tried to quietly work past, but then abruptly stopped. He knew for sure that his dad wasn't home. His car wasn't in the garage. Besides, he himself had said he wouldn't be back until evening. Without much thought, Kevin pushed the door to the bedroom and saw Drew on the bed with some man. The boy immediately grabbed his phone and started searching for his father's number, simultaneously running to his room to lock himself in there. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to press the call button. Kevin felt a sharp pain in the back of his head. Everything went dark before his eyes, and he fell face down on the floor. "Idiot, did you kill him?" Drew asked quietly, running to her lover who had hit the boy. "I don't know. How would I know? I'm not a doctor," the lover replied with a foolish expression, looking at Drew. "Definitely not a doctor. You're an idiot," Drew said, shaking her head. Rob didn't have any important meetings that day. He was just planning to spend the whole day dealing with documents to prepare for negotiations. On such days, he didn't turn off his phone. He just put it on silent mode. Somehow, at that very moment when they called him from the hospital, he glanced at the screen. If not for this random coincidence, he would have missed the call. 10 minutes later, Rob stood at the doors labeled morgue. A doctor approached him and introduced himself as Gregory. A few seconds later, another man entered. He showed his ID, said he was an investigator, and his name was Mitchell. "Sorry, there must be some mistake. I was told to come here," Rob said, bewildered and hoping for a miracle. "Let's go inside, and you'll understand everything," the doctor said cautiously. In the middle of the room was a stretcher with a body covered by a sheet. Rob's heart was pounding so loudly that even Mitchell could hear it. The doctor pulled back the sheet from the boy's face, and Rob immediately fell to his knees. How did this happen?" Rob asked in a voice that sounded foreign even to himself. "Your son was hit by a car," the investigator said very quietly and calmly. The driver brought your son to the hospital himself. That's when Gregory called me. Please accept my condolences. When you're ready, give us a call to discuss the details of the case. Can I stay alone with my son? Rob asked. Of course, just one request. Don't touch the boy with your hands. We still need to examine the body, Gregory requested. Rob nodded and waited for the doctor and the policeman to leave. I lost my own child, the investigator said to the doctor behind the door. I understand his pain, but there's something about this case that seems strange to me. You're not used to criminals coming forward and turning themselves in, Gregory asked. His tone was oddly arrogant. No, it happens sometimes, Mitchell replied. But my gut tells me there's more to this story, and my gut has never let me down. Everything happens for the first time, the doctor replied. You're just too affected by this story, so it reminded you of your own pain. Mitchell agreed that the doctor might be right. He left with a rather pensive look. Gabby remembered the boy who treated her and her sister to ice cream for a long time, and she didn't care whether Kevin was the son of a millionaire or just as poor as she was. Gabby's child's heart had not yet been poisoned by materialism, but it had been 6 months, and she occasionally remembered that incident and simply smiled. It was nice to know that there were kind people in the world. She went to her night shift even in a good mood. Gabby entered the crematorium hall. No one was there yet. She hoped the night would pass calmly, but less than half an hour later, the doors opened, and orderlies brought in a stretcher. They were doing everything very quickly and carelessly, causing the sheet covering the body to slip off. Well, it's going to be cremated in the morning anyway, so it doesn't matter, one of the orderlies said. Gabby, join us, the second orderly shouted cheerfully, even though it was a bit inappropriate for the place they were in. The girl snapped out of her thoughts and looked at the two men who had disrupted her peace. Then her gaze fell on the one she had been waiting for cremation that morning. She let out a loud scream and clasped her hands over her mouth. Do you two know each other? The cheerful orderly changed his tone. Sorry, I didn't know. We didn't. We've only seen each other once in our lives, Gabby replied. Sad. The kid is your age, you know. Hit by a car. Can you imagine? The other man said. And his father is a well-known person in town. But you can't escape fate, his companion reflected. Gabby froze in place, unable to take her eyes off Kevin. The orderlies exchanged glances and decided to leave. They didn't know what words to use to comfort the young janitor a little. The girl approached the boy. His face bore bruises, but otherwise, he was as handsome as the day they first saw each other. This shift was different from all the others. Gabby couldn't make herself stop looking at Kevin. She even thought she noticed some strange things. She was starting to think she was going crazy. Whenever she accidentally glanced at him, it seemed like his chest was rising, as if he were breathing. I need to get some sleep, or I'll lose my mind, the girl said to herself, and then she looked at Kevin again. Suddenly, the boy's finger twitched up and down. Gabby flinched in surprise. What kind of mystic nonsense is this? The girl exclaimed in anger and fear. Gabby sat right in front of him and stared intently. She wanted to convince herself that she was just imagining things. But no. Kevin's finger twitched again, and then his eyelashes trembled, as if he were pretending to sleep. If this is some kind of prank, you better come clean right now, Gabby said sternly aloud. For a moment, the girl actually thought the boy had just decided to tease her. Somehow found out she worked at the crematorium and wanted to mock her. But no one responded to her. No, Gabby tried to persuade herself. That's impossible. What if someone just decided to get rid of the boy this way? Gabby had often seen in TV shows that the children of wealthy people were either kidnapped or killed. She decided to check whether he was still alive. The girl had seen corpses many times. It was her constant company in this place, and never once had any of them shown any signs of life. Kevin, however, looked more like someone unconscious or deeply asleep than dead. Gabby approached Kevin and leaned over his face. She knew that the most reliable sign of life was the presence of a pulse. The girl also knew how to check it. Jackie often told her stories from the hospital, but to check if Kevin had a pulse, she had to touch him, and that was very scary. Gabby carefully raised her hand and began to bring it closer to the boy's neck. But as soon as the distance between her finger and Kevin's skin became a few millimeters, she pulled her hand back. "No, I can't," Gabby said aloud. Tears welling up, she continued to convince herself that there was nothing to be afraid of, when suddenly Kevin's eyelashes twitched again, and she stood right in front of him. There was no doubt now that she wasn't imagining things. Gabby immediately filled with determination and pressed her fingers to the boy's neck. She dashed out of the crematorium and ran to find her sister. Jackie was lying on the couch in the office. She wasn't asleep, but her headache was so severe that she decided to lie down and rest for a while. Because of the pain, she didn't even bother going down to her sister. "Jackie," Gabby said, "call the police urgently. They brought a boy to me there. They're going to cremate him tomorrow, but he's alive." Jackie lifted her head from the pillow and looked at her sister incredulously. Of course, she didn't believe her and decided to make sure herself that Gabby was right first. "I knew there was something fishy here," said Mitchell, who stood next to the boy just 10 minutes after Jackie's call to the police station. Mitchell called Rob and asked him to come to the department alone. He forbade Rob from telling anyone that his son was alive. It could interfere with the investigation, he explained. Rob immediately got out of bed. He wasn't sleeping anyway. He drove to the hospital, breaking all traffic rules. The roads were empty anyway. "How did it happen that my living son was declared dead?" he asked the investigator. "That's what I'm trying to find out," Mitchell replied. Rob said he wanted to see him, but the investigator replied that it was impossible for now. "You see, obviously more than one person is involved here. I don't think the hospital staff are so foolish as not to distinguish a living person from a dead one," Mitchell said. "I've already sent a group of policemen to fetch the head doctor of this hospital. A nurse is currently watching over your son, the one who discovered Kevin's pulse. We need to make sure the doctor confesses to everything. And the man who hit Kevin, did he lie too?" Rob couldn't understand. "That's what I'm going to find out," Mitchell said mysteriously. The investigator said that while his colleagues would be questioning Gregory, he himself would go to the driver who brought the boy's body to the hospital. Since there had been no trial yet, he could compel him to give a confession. He instructed Rob to go home and be ready to come to the station at any time. Rob went home. His state of mind was inexplicable, but the predominant feeling he experienced was joy. The funeral was cancelled. Rob prayed all the way for Mitchell to solve this crime. He didn't even get out of the car. He just sat in the driveway, lost in various thoughts. The sound of an approaching car woke Drew up. She realized that Kevin wasn't there. Of course, she guessed that Rob was tormented because of his son, but she didn't feel sorry for him. She wanted this whole story to end quickly, and Kevin to be cremated. Why isn't he waking up if he's alive? Gabby worried about Kevin and asked Jackie. "I think he's in a coma. His body doesn't respond to anything, but he's alive," Jackie speculated. "I just don't understand one thing. Why can't they transfer him to a hospital room? The boy needs treatment. Until this investigator solves the case, we might actually have to bury the boy." Drew waited for about another hour, but Rob never got out of the car. She worried that he might do something to himself, which she didn't need at all. She decided to go down to him to offer support. When Drew opened the car door and sat in the passenger seat, she was surprised to notice that Rob wasn't hysterical. There weren't even tears in his eyes. "Can't sleep?" she cautiously asked. "How can I sleep?" Rob dryly replied. It was so hard for him to keep such news to himself. But Mitchell ordered that no one be told about what happened. "I still can't understand why Kevin went to football that day. The practice was cancelled," Rob said, just to talk about something. Although this question really bothered him, Now he understood that it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe there were some competitions scheduled. Drew guessed. No, he went there without security and without a driver. Rob continued. It's as if he was lured there, like they wanted to kill him. Drew's face paled. She was greatly alarmed by Rob's assumption. But he couldn't guess that it was her lover who found a drunkard who agreed to take the blame for the fatal accident and go to prison. There was no chance that Rob would learn the truth because Drew had made deals with the doctors. They just had to get through tomorrow, and the story would be over. Drew and her lover were convinced that the boy was dead. They were so frightened when he fell that they didn't think to check his pulse or listen for breath. They immediately started to think about how to cover up their crime. 3 hours had passed since Rob left the police station. Dawn was breaking, but there was still no news. Drew sat next to him in the passenger seat. She tried to engage in conversation, but for the last 20 minutes, she had been fast asleep. Rob, however, couldn't fall asleep. Every 5 minutes, he checked his phone, waiting for the awaited call. Finally, a call came from Mitchell. Urgently come to the police station and pick up your wife. But don't say a word to her. Tell her you want to surprise her, Mitchell ordered. It was very fortunate that Drew was asleep in the passenger seat of the car. Rob didn't have to come up with anything. What surprises could there be on the night before the funeral of their own son? The girl opened her eyes only when they were already pulling up to the police station. Why are we here? Frightened, Drew asked. Surprise. Rob shrugged, not coming up with anything smarter. He just didn't have time to think of anything better. Rob got out of the car and opened the door for Drew, but she shook her head and said she wouldn't go anywhere. Rob didn't want to wait and persuade her. He understood that Mitchell didn't just order him to come with his wife for no reason. He took Drew's hand and forcibly pulled her out of the car. Right at the station doors, the girl saw her lover getting out of the police car. He had handcuffs on, and the officer was pushing him from behind to make him walk faster. Drew stopped. What's happening again? Angrily asked Rob, then looked to where his young wife was staring. Wait, isn't that your fitness trainer? Drew started to run, but only managed to descend 2 steps. Rob grabbed her waist and hoisted her onto his shoulder. Where do you think you're going, silly? You won't get away, said Rob, and carried the girl to the investigator. The man was starting to figure out what was going on here and who was to blame for what happened to his son. His suspicions were confirmed. In the corridor sat both the driver and Gregory, all in handcuffs. Now Drew and her lover joined them. All these people wanted to bury your son alive, the investigator explained. Only 3 of them were sure he was already dead. Mitchell explained that the driver had already confessed to everything. He was simply asked to take the blame. He hadn't hit anyone. The doctor was paid handsomely to expedite the cremation and to conclude in the death report that the boy was indeed hit by a car. The masterminds behind all of this were Drew and her lover. With each word from the investigator, Rob's face grew angrier. There was a service weapon on Mitchell's desk. Several times, the businessman glanced at it, and after the last sentence, he couldn't hold back. He grabbed the gun, drew it from the holster, and walked into the corridor where the whole group was sitting behind bars, the ones who had decided to cremate a live boy. Rob didn't aim at anyone in particular. He hated everyone who was there. A gunshot rang out in the police station, but everyone remained alive. Mitchell managed to grab Rob's hands, and he fired into the wall. The bullet went into the plaster right above Drew's head. The girl flinched and burst into loud sobs. After this incident, she began to stutter. The only one who could have avoided prison time was the driver, but Rob didn't want to show mercy to anyone. He talked to the judge and the prosecutor to ensure he received at least a small sentence. Kevin was indeed in a coma. As soon as Mitchell clarified all the details of the case, he signaled the hospital that the boy could be transferred to a room. Kevin remained unconscious for 3 more days. It was Gabby who noticed that he opened his eyes again. Every day after school, the girl ran to Kevin, sitting by his side for entire days. She had fallen in love with him and constantly prayed for his health. When Kevin opened his eyes, he immediately recognized Gabby. Rob rushed to the hospital right away. He lifted Jackie into his arms and twirled her around, encountering her accidentally in the corridor. "How grateful I am to you for your sister," exclaimed the happy Rob, placing the girl back on the ground and rushing to his son's room. Of course, the millionaire couldn't help but reward the two sisters who saved his son's life. Kevin needed care and attention after coming out of the coma, where he had spent a total of a week. Rob invited Jackie to work with him. They and Gabby moved into his mansion. Gabby helped around the house, while Jackie became Kevin's nurse, administering IVs and monitoring his vital signs. Kevin quickly recovered. Within a month, he was living as before. Jackie and Gabby remained living in Rob's house. Jackie was able to save up money for her education, and Ray enrolled in medical school. She wanted to become a surgeon. Rob gladly helped the girl, even promising to open his own clinic for her when she finished her studies and gained experience. Kevin fell in love with Gabby just as deeply as she did with him. The girl continued to work as a maid in the house, but the boy knew for sure that as soon as they turned 18, they would marry. Hearing such a wish, Rob wasn't the least bit upset. The social difference between his son and his chosen one didn't bother him. He arranged a magnificent wedding for them with great pride. Many years later, Rob would tell his grandchildren about how their parents met. Their story was truly romantic. Rob himself never found a spouse. Then again, he never wanted one. Jackie became the chief doctor of her own clinic at the age of 35. Rob kept his promise. Moreover, they had become family now.